Okay, so our next speaker is Brett Huson from the Prairie Climate Centre. Brett is from the Gixon Nation of the northwest interior of BC. Growing up in this strong matrilineal society, Brett developed a passion for the culture, land, and politics of his people, and a desire to share the knowledge and stories. Brett has worked in the film industry and television industry and is an award-winning author, and is a volunteer board member for various organizations. As Brett continues creating new art and working on new books, he's also working with the Prairie Climate Centre at the University of Winnipeg. With the support of his wife, Jerry, and their children, Warren and Ruby, Brett endeavors to continue sharing stories with his writing, artwork, and photography. This presentation will explore Indigenous and Western knowledge on climate change and examples of how to take a two-eyed seeing approach to adaptation planning. Please join me in welcoming Brett Huson. Advance your slides this way.
All right, so I have all my notes on my presentation, but they don't have presenter view, so I'm going to kind of be fumbling through this. Amahiluch hetkum sket schwai lach sintich wud galhuchswi wud good kunuch wud sawitwi. Good morning. My name is Hetkum Sket. My government name is Brett Huson, and as it was mentioned, I'm from the Northwest Interior, what settlers call British Columbia. I'm in Gitxsan territory. I came to Winnipeg 18 years ago. Thought I was going to start sharing my knowledge through film and television, but that over that period of time, I didn't quite see an opportunity for me to share how I wanted to share. So I ended up writing an article for a youth magazine called Red Rising, and then my publishers saw that article and asked if I wanted to turn it into a book. And this book turned into a series. So I do a series for young people that talks about the interconnectedness of the land with our knowledge, but also trying to parallel that with scientific terminology that so they can see the parallel between our way of knowing and Western way of knowing. So Indigenous knowledges refers to the knowledge systems, practices, and beliefs of the Indigenous peoples that have been developed over generations of living in close relationship with their environment. Indigenous knowledge often includes a deep understanding of the natural world and how it functions, with a strong emphasis on sustainability and the need to maintain a harmonious relationship with the environment. In recent years, there's been a growing recognition of the importance of incorporating Indigenous knowledges into climate change research and adaptation planning. This is because the Indigenous peoples are often among the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, and because their knowledge and practices can offer valuable insights into how to adapt and how to mitigate these impacts. Translating Indigenous stories to find their truths involves recognizing that the stories may not use the same language as Western science, but they make the same observations. Indigenous knowledge systems involve peer review and consensus, and also complex governance systems, societies, and languages just don't simply happen when you have a singular person making decisions. So what a lot of religious missionaries called mythologies, because they were the first to translate our languages, were in fact stories about the ecology of the land and the description of the beings that were, the description that we use for beings was merely an understanding of the energy that is being exchanged in those moments. So when we're talking about creator, we believe that creator was just everything, the energy in everyone. So as an example, the Gitxsan people, my people, revered the spider as a connector of our world, holding all things together. This was due to the observation of the mycorrhizal fungi in all the soil and just seeing them on the roots of the plants that we harvested. The Gitxsan people saw the truth in observation, while non-speakers of the language saw myth in the stories. Later, when researchers came to the lands, the Gitxsan people told them the story of the salmon's journey and how the salmon fed the land through the connection of the spider. However, the researchers did not credit the Indigenous accounts for guiding their research. Although the researchers later found that the fungi spread marine-derived N15, the Gitxsan people didn't change how they behaved with the land. Although understanding the world microscopically is important in other research, it didn't change an understanding of an already understood ecological process. So in many Indigenous communities, leadership is not just about having power or authority over others, but rather in serving the community and acting by cultural values and practices. This can include reciprocity, respect for elders, and a deep connection to the land and the natural world. So Indigenous leadership often involves a collaborative approach and decision-making happening through consensus building and the consultation of community members. Leaders are expected to act with humility and prioritize the well-being of the community over personal gain. Overall, leadership in Indigenous communities is deeply rooted in cultural values and traditions and is seen as a way to promote health and vitality for the community as a whole. So Indigenous knowledges can contribute to climate change research and adaptation planning in many ways. As an example, it can help identify climate-related changes in the natural environment that may not be visible typically through other research methods alone. Such changes as the timing of plant and animal life cycles. It can also provide information on cultural and land use practices that can help build better resilience in communities. Incorporating Indigenous knowledge into climate change research and adaptation planning requires a respectful and collaborative approach that recognizes the values of Indigenous knowledge systems and the rights of Indigenous peoples. By doing so, we can work towards a more effective and equitable response to the impacts of climate change. So Elder Albert Marshall is a Mi'kmaq elder from Nova Scotia, and him and his wife Medina developed the two-eyed seeing methodology. So this is a framework in understanding and integrating Indigenous and Western ways of knowing to promote sustainability in the natural world. The two eyes refer to the idea that we must see the world through Indigenous and Western perspectives to understand and address complex problems fully. So this approach emphasizes the importance of working collaboratively and respectfully across cultures and to create more harmonious relationships with the environment. So where was I here? This process and philosophy have been the foundation of the work that we do at the Prairie Climate Centre. So Indigenous knowledge section of the Climate Atlas is something that some of you may have seen already. This launched in March of 2022. Yeah, so a lot of things happen so fast, I sometimes forget the exact dates. So the Indigenous knowledge section is something that represents this practice in action. So a lot of the work that we have done with the Climate Atlas is truly an example of putting to action the words or the practices of two-eyed seeing. The Indigenous knowledge section of the Climate Atlas is a platform that showcases the invaluable knowledge and experience of the Indigenous communities across Canada. It features the interactive maps and videos that you typically see through the Climate Atlas, but also shares traditional knowledge, stories, and observations about the climate change and its impacts on the land, water, and communities. This section also highlights the Indigenous people's resilience and adaptation strategies in the face of the changing climatic conditions, including using traditional ecological knowledge to monitor and to manage resources. Overall, the Indigenous knowledge section provides a unique perspective on the climate change grounded in Indigenous worldviews and highlights the importance of incorporating traditional knowledges into climate change policy. So this is, again, like I said, two-eyed seeing in action. And it's something that I hope that, we can help others achieve through practice, leading by example, something that one of the reasons I love working with PCC is the group truly does take to heart reconciliation in a way that we're moving forward together, not looking at one method of research as more important than the other. So when it comes to the views that govern me, I kind of look at Western pedagogy typically emphasizes individual learning and achievement with a focus on intellectual knowledge and cognitive skills, whereas in contrast, Gitsan pedagogy values community participation, experience, and the practical application of the knowledge. So with Western epistemology, the views kind of prioritize the analytical and objective perspective, emphasizing the separation between the subject and the object. On the other hand, whereas our epistemological views prioritize the interconnectedness and interdependence of all things, emphasizing the importance of relationships and context of the understanding the world. Overall, Gitsan pedagogy and epistemological views are grounded in deep respect for the natural world, with the importance of maintaining the balance and harmony within it. They prioritize community relationship and practical knowledge and offer unique perspective on learning and understanding the world that offers that's different from Western approaches. Again, not trying to say there's a better way to learn, learning is learning, but it's also understanding that we can't narrow our view and make standards the guide that we follow, because the only way we're going to be able to find solutions is to truly diversify our perspective, because we don't need to walk with blinders on, we need to open it up, because everything is peer reviewable. I always hate the idea that people say we have to follow very specific standards. Learning and sharing is different from looking at the actual data itself. There's separate things. So that's kind of what I wanted to impart. And again, this was brief. It's something I don't typically do in such a short time, but I thank you for lending me your eyes and your ears. And if you have any questions, just let me know. I'm available on the contact information below. And I know how we're doing for time.
Well, thank you very much. We are doing wonderful for time. If there is a question for Danny or Brett, we can take that now, or we can do some more questions after the break. I didn't see any questions pop up on the screen. And has anyone got a question that they would like to ask now? Here's a question that came up for Danny. Any interesting differences between CMIP 5 and CMIP 6? So do you want to take a crack at that? Okay. Do you want to just hold on? Because maybe there'll be a question for you. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, a great question. So I think everybody's heard that the CMIP 6 models, or some of the CMIP 6 models, are hot. They produce a warmer world than previous generations of models. And this is because they have a higher climate sensitivity. That is, for a given amount of carbon dioxide increase, they have a larger change in temperatures. This is something that we're wrestling with a little bit in planning out the next version of the Atlas. But other than that, it's the same message. It's the same story that's told by CMIP 6 versus CMIP 5. Just some of them are hotter than others that were in the CMIP 5. Are they wrong? We don't know. Let's hope they're not all the cooler ones are wrong and that just the warmer ones are right. But it's the modeling process is all about identifying the range of possibilities, not using one model as the truth because we don't know what that is. So that's the simple answer. I bet you Elaine could answer that better.
Thank you very much, Danny. Are there any questions for Brett or Danny before we head off? Oh, do we have another one online? What are your thoughts, Brett, about beginning to include the term Indigenous science, either in place of or in tandem with the term Indigenous knowledge?
Well, there definitely is kind of a distinction. I can speak for my people. There are so many different nations. Indigenous is just a term similar to Asian or African. It doesn't really mean anything other than distinguishing an area where people live. But there are many nations. I can speak for my nation, not for them, but on behalf of what our knowledge systems are. There is a distinction between what you would call science in our culture versus just simple knowledge. So that comes out through our, what we call Yushlamach. Yushlamach is our pedagogy. It's our way of teaching. It's the way of learning. It's the process that we go through from a very young age until we grow older. So it really kind of depends. Like Indigenous science, it definitely is a thing. It is a practice. I'm sure other nations have a very similar perspective. But when it comes to knowledges, that's something we would call, that's part of your guaxiins, your natural inheritance. So guaxiins for us is a term that we use when you are going to, when you're from a specific area. It's your responsibility and your right to learn about the land that you're living on, you call home. That's something you have an obligation to do. So that's guaxiins. That's just general knowledge you learn from where you're living. So even if you're not originally from those lands, wherever you're calling home now, you must learn about it, not just the community, the city, or the municipality, but the actual land itself. So there's a very kind of strong distinction. So I think Indigenous sciences can be used. Who defines that? It's hard to say because the practices are so different, but we have very unique specialities within our culture as well. So I grew up through our knowledge system, through our education system, learning about ecological processes. So ecology was the kind of typically where I studied outside of Western. So I went to public school as well, but in our nation, I spent a lot of time with people who specialize in ecology, understanding how our ecosystem worked, understanding the interaction between all of the flora and fauna and how it made our world. So we view ourselves as a keystone species. That's one of the things that defines who we are as people, is we made the land what it is. So we practiced cultural infrastructural practices that actually shaped what the land's become. And that happened after the last glacial maximum. It actually happened over a couple of glacial maximums, or what people call ice age. Our stories go back at least 80,000 years.
Thank you very much for that explanation. And a question here from Julia.
Thank you. Really awesome storytelling, and really appreciate that. I was wondering if you can tell more story or another story about how Indigenous knowledge or science has been successfully integrated or collaborated with science knowledge.
Sure. Again, a lot of our stories have been utilized by researchers in my community and never been attributed. One of those being a story that comes from my clan, the story of Tibasa. Tibasa is the great one-horned mountain goat who flicked pieces of the mountain onto the city because the people began to overuse the resources and mistreat the mountain goats. This story commemorates a time when the landslide wiped out the city of Demlahamid. Demlahamid was a city that was established as soon as the glacier receded, or the ice shield receded. As soon as we were able to move back to our territory, we established Demlahamid. So over that period of time, we had begun to harvest too many of the trees on the side of the mountain where the city was. And also we started to overuse resources that you're not supposed to overuse. So when the landslide happened, it wiped out the whole city, and all the different nations that lived within that city separated and moved on. So there was the Nispat, the Tsimiksan, the Gitxsan, Tautan, many nations lived in a very large city of about 450,000 people. And that was wiped out. So this information, when we talk about through our stories, the descriptions of the land during those periods, it actually aligns perfectly with the studies that talk about the glacial history. So we talked about our economic boom, also of the Ulikin. The Ulikin are what allowed us to come out of the last glacial maximum very successfully. So it was a trade surrounded by the oil that came from the Ulikin, the herring-like fish that we harvested on the coast. So our people would purposely plant kelp and put spruce boughs at the mouths of rivers to increase the spawning habitat for the Ulikin, because that allowed us to increase the how much we had. And the oil that was created from that was traded throughout Western Canada, all the way down into California. So people like the Cree, the Blackfoot, and those that were located in part of that trading route couldn't pronounce Ulikin. Their R's, their L sounded like R's. So if you look down, what's just south of British Columbia is Oregon. That came from Urikin because they couldn't say Ulikin. So Oregon was named after, they called it the Oregon coast. That's where a lot of the trade happened. It was a trade hub. So now they don't know where the name came from, but we know. So there's a lot of information that we have that helps connect the dots for a lot of research that's being done or has been done.
Thank you very much, both of you, for your presentations. At the break, I do have a gift for you.